Hi everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to the CPD session focusing on the importance of one-to-one tutorials. I'm going to share some of my experiences and offer some techniques and rationale to how to manage students effectively through the one-to-one tutorial sessions that you're going to be doing. Now, tutorials or learning conversations are an ideal method of engaging the learner and setting and reviewing their own targets. The one-to-one tutorials provide a means of empowering and enabling the learner to take ownership of their targets. Because of this ownership, they are more likely to achieve their targets, or, if not, are more likely to reflect on why they haven't achieved them. This method is particularly positive as it's very learner-centred and not tutor-led. Learning conversations are structured to provide the optimal level or optimal environment in which to communicate students' learning. The structure and resulting processes generate the conditions for trust and openness between a student and a tutor, combined with balanced relationships and, of course, respect. These tutorials allow participants to work towards communication that is helpful, candid, and able to be heard by others. Now, the college policy focuses quite heavily on the rationale behind tutorials. According to the policy, they say that tutorials are integral and fundamental to all learning. The focus of tutorials is on holistic support of students. Tutorials support the early identification of individual needs and ensure that each student is working towards an agreed and clearly understood action plan. Tutorials are very, very important. And it's very different from any sorts of other conversations that you have. For example, presentations, feedbacks, conversations inside the classroom. In today's fast-paced, complex world, success depends very much on the engagement and contribution of each student. Learning conversations promote full understanding of other people's thinking. They draw out solutions, ideas and goals that are inherent with organisations such as the Manchester College and students' life in academic circles. Learning conversations focus on deep understanding and are built on multiple academic theories from the helping and learning disciplines that have been real-world tested. They're a fundamental building block of strong working relationships in education. They act as creative solutions and also smart organisations to help people to develop good learning behaviours. Now, what does this really mean for the student or for the tutors, as a matter of fact? Well, tutorials are the best way to really talk to students. Tutorials enable teachers to find out about their students' personalities, their likes, their dislikes, what makes them tick, their ambitions. When delivered effectively and delivered well, tutorials can improve academic performance and personal growth. They can motivate learners. They can improve the self-esteem and learner confidence. They can develop independent learners, support progression and, of course, employability, provide additional learning support, respond to learners' well-being. Learners feel very valued and respected as individuals rather than just part of a larger group. It can improve positive attitudes to learning and, of course, when done right, it can also improve attendance and punctuality issues. But what does that mean from our point of view? What impact does that have for teachers? Well, of course, it increases our knowledge of the individual learners. It informs us how to allow for reflection to improve teaching and learning and course management, of course. Now, one of the biggest things that Ofsted are focusing now is the learner journey. So how can we develop effective teaching and learning strategies and enjoyment on the course if we don't get that feedback either one-to-one or in groups? It's really important that as course managers and tutors, we really take ownership and find out what students think and what support they need during their academic progress. Of course, touching on that, it increases knowledge of the learner journey and enables the learner to find out exactly where they are on that journey. Gives tutors a real sense of pride, supporting learners to succeed. Obviously, if we have a better relationship with our students, then we are going to feel high levels of pride when they succeed and progress on to the next stage of our either employment or education. It, of course, builds relationships which have a positive impact on attitudes and behaviours. and it reduces disciplinary issues. One of the biggest things in today's day and age is us tutors are getting more and more work put on us. So it's very, very important that we try and focus on how to create excellent lessons rather than chasing up students because they haven't attended for whatever reason. Now, there is no hard or fast rule and no set recipe for doing an effective tutorial. You do need to cover some things, but these can be interchangeable depending on the importance or the things that come out of the tutorial session. For example, some of the things that I use in my tutorials initially is things like attendance reports from LIP and EBS, punctuality reports as well. I quite heavily focus on summative achievement, so as students progress through their journey, I like to focus on why they've achieved a pass in the previous assignment rather than a merit. Look at the behaviours and learner behaviours that are around that achievement. Try and focus on ways to improve and set targets around that as well. I think it's also important to focus on formative assessments. So these are how well the students are doing from a day-to-day basis. I personally set my students some sort of quiz or assessment for learning tool during the lesson, and then I use that as a basis to speak to the learners and set new targets. I find if a learner finds out if they've got a numerical score on their performance in each lesson, they know exactly how to improve it or which behaviours are positive and which behaviours are negative to improve their own learning. If appropriate, and one of the things I do is I calculate BTEC points, and I've got a spreadsheet that I will share with you guys. So I calculate BTEC points and convert that into UCAS points at every opportunity, so students can actually see exactly what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So we can see that for a pass, for example, they get 70 BTEC points rather than 90 for a distinction. And I find that when you put numerical values to grades, then students start to take note a little bit more effectively and take ownership of their own education a bit better. Finally, I think it's really important to mention the subjective feedback from teachers. So I always, before a tutorial, go and speak to a few of the tutors and find out exactly how well that learner's doing. This doesn't necessarily have to be evidence-based rather than qualitative. So these sorts of things are how motivated the student is in class, how well they're conducting work in groups and individuals, if they're a little bit quiet, if they're a little bit chatty, and try and put strategies in place to help the student, or at least identify to the student that certain behaviours are good or need to be improved. So there are some skills that are required in order to deliver a really, really good tutorial, and these are skills that most tutors have, but some need to progress or develop. So one of the first things and most important things is tutors need to actively listen to the learner. They need to go in a non-judgmental way so they can listen to what the learner's saying and try and guide them down a correct path rather than to tell them they have to go down a certain path. They need to ask open questions, once again try not to instruct. Help the learner look for patterns in their own behaviour. For example, if they're late on a Monday morning, you can use the attendance reports from LIP or EBS and you can find out what percentage you've got. Possibly once you use evidence like that, then students sit up and take a little bit more notice of any patterns in their behaviour. For example, if they're working late on a Sunday night and they can't get up in time for those Monday morning sessions, you can maybe look to strategies to develop in and change that around. Help the learner to use feedback to promote new learning and sustain achievement. Help the learner to identify goals, targets and SMART targets as well. I think it's really important that any feedback that you give a learner should be sort of reflected in their goals or targets going forward. So at the end of each session I always get them to set themselves 3 goals that we review incrementally throughout the academic year, and when they've achieved them we tick them off on LIP, and it's really good a self-assessment tool, and it helps learners to reflect on the conversations that we have. Help the learner to self-assess their own performance through attendance and punctuality data that they can find on LIP. Help them reflect on their summative assessment grades and find ways of improving going forward. And also how to improve on formal and informal feedback. Formal being from assignments, informal being from the subjective thoughts and opinions of tutors, and possibly even peers in the class. This process also helps the learner to retrace steps and to analyse processes. For example, if students have a negative relationship with a tutor or a classmate, then often these tutorial conversations can open a student's eyes. Sometimes you're the only positive influence in a young person's life, so identifying that people have different ways of thinking or situations can be dealt with differently is a very, very important tool, and it's something that we need to progress with as tutors. Also, help the learner to identify useful strategies for moving forward. So that could be strategies with anything. It could be interpersonal, social, academic, anything that you think would be benefit, and once again tailored towards the needs of that student. There are unfortunately some pitfalls. These are some of the things that I've seen on one-to-one tutorials from my previous job. But sometimes when a tutorial goes badly, it's often because of some of the following things. If a tutor goes into a tutorial and they're quite judgmental rather than in a position to listen and to understand, then that can have a negative impact. If tutors try and defend rather than explore assumptions or try and guide students to their own realisations, then it can have a negative impact. Responding emotionally rather than using emotion to inform your own understanding as a tutor. And what I mean by that is sometimes in education, especially nowadays, tutors go into lots of situations with lots of workload, lots of stress, and this can be an emotional response or lead to an emotional response in tutorials. Sometimes if you're working with incredibly difficult students, it's hard not to be emotionally involved in that situation, but it's really important that you do stand back and be quite objective about these conversations. It's important holding back observations or questions rather than letting them be addressed. Sometimes fear can have a big impact on the tutorial conversation. If you go into a situation with a tutorial and communicate as the expert and not really seeing it from other points of view, then that can have a huge negative impact. And then responding to a situation or something that the student says without actually reflecting on the difficulties or the issues that surround the problem, that can also have a negative impact. And unfortunately, the reality is if you have one negative tutorial, very likely that future tutorials will be quite negative as well. So it's important to enter these with an open mind and be very, very supportive. Now, sometimes we do get stuck on different on different strategies for running a smooth and successful tutorial. We will do a little activity on these. But sometimes if you get that student that's difficult or just can't quite see it from your point of view, or you're trying to explain something and it's not really working, there are strategies out there, and we'll do an activity on this. But here's some of a few. You can try and use mind mapping, reframing thoughts, putting the student or trying to encourage the student to put themselves in a different person's position, the yes technique, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail, brainstorming or thought showers, try and imagine different situations and the impact it has, and also the awkward silence, which is very much sitting back and waiting for the student to respond to your thoughts or to try and develop their thoughts even further. If done successfully, we will definitely create independent learners. It doesn't matter whether they come in on an entry 3 program or a level 3 or a HE program. If we develop these strategies, then we'll definitely help our learners to become very independent. The policy says that students should receive a structured one-to-one tutorial at least once every half term. If they do this and it's suitably progressive, then it will definitely set them on the path to become a more focused and independent learner. Thank you very much for listening.